Hello and welcome to Parenting Beyond Belief. Let me read from our storybook here. I should probably start where the story starts instead of the wrong place, right? Okay, welcome to Parenting Beyond Belief. It is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. Let's see here. Too many pictures here. Go back here. Parenting Beyond Belief is a show for folks who are raising free thinkers in a religious world. We discuss parenting, share our experiences, play fun games, and take phone calls from parents who have questions, thoughts, or experiences about parenting in a secular way. Our regular show times are on the second and fourth Saturdays of each month at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, so tune in. And we're going to have a special show next weekend, actually on the 15th of December, and we will have Callie Wright. She had a call to action for people to support the trans community. And so we're going to have one of our other hosts, Kendall Hopkins, who is lesbian, and we'll have Callie, who is transgender, and talk about raising children who are non-normative and how you can help them. So that's going to be a special show. I'm very excited about that. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. This is a touch and feel sort of deal here. If you're listening to us on speaker, please click that little orange subscribe button. Do you know your colors? If you like what we do, please consider becoming, if you like what we do, I have to frame that right, please consider becoming a Patreon. And we are at patreon.com, Parenting Beyond Belief. Today's hosts are Janet Heimlich, author of Breaking Their Will, Shedding Light on Religious Child Maltreatment, which is behind me here, and founder of the Child Friendly Faith Project. And we have Dr. Dale McGowan, who has authored and edited many great books, including the gold standard secular parenting books, Parenting Beyond Belief, and his books are never on the shelf at the library here. We need somebody to donate a bunch more. Raising Free Thinkers, In Faith and in Doubt, and Atheism for Dummies. So there's stuff to do today, and the first thing I'm going to do is a little parenting tip. And I was thinking about this because of something that happened. As usual, my parenting tip comes from what has happened recently. And it's pretty short, but it's important. If you are not a parent, you should refrain from, think hard about, and be careful of judging anyone who has children. If you have one child, you should be careful of, refrain from judging and giving advice to, or reconsider strongly, people who have two children. And it goes on and on and on. At each level, there's something new to learn, and paying attention and listening is key. If you are a parent with a traditional household, don't think you know anything about single parenting. Moreover, what was I going to say?
I don't know, but I just feel like interjecting that I think that each person has helpful experiences that they can share and help others. And when we just draw from our own experiences, it can be very enlightening for other people without us superimposing our theories or whatever on people when they've had a very different experience.
Right. The judgment is the thing. So, for instance, if you see somebody just losing their mind with their child in the store, instead of looking at them and thinking they're horrible parents, look and see if there's something you can't do to help. Like they have lots of things in the basket and the kid is unhappy and they're trying to get through the grocery line. Maybe make a face at the kid to try to keep them happier, make them laugh. Or start putting stuff on the conveyor belt for the person whose child is losing their minds. Try to be helpful rather than judgmental.
The question, can I hold your baby for you, is a good one sometimes.
Yeah, in certain circumstances, that's fine. It can also be creepy, depending, but hopefully it's in those situations when somebody could really use the help. Let's see. So that's my tip. Pretty simple one. Try to pay attention to it. And let's go on to the topic. The topic today is spanking. For most secular folks and people who have left religion behind, it's pretty clear that spanking's no good. But we still have to deal with folks who walk up to us and say, oh, I was spanked and that's not a problem. I turned out okay, that sort of thing. Or people who spank anyway, and I have a story to tell on myself eventually here. But if you look at the data, just look at the data, it's absolutely, clearly, undeniably the worst thing you can do for parenting. I have a list of 60-something organizations that have to do with parenting and taking care of people and violence and families and human rights that all say that spanking is something that should be put to bed, absolutely not done. That's pretty substantial. And then more specifically, I have a couple of articles, and I just love the title of this one. The spanking debate is over. It's over. Spanking loses, period. So why do people keep spanking? And I am so lucky that I have two people who have done a hell of a lot of research in this area. And so I'm going to draw upon what you know. Jan knows more than any of us should ever want to know about religious maltreatment, and spanking is one of the biggies. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. Tell us.
Okay. Well, I actually don't use the word spanking because I think it sounds too cute. It reminds me of Spanky and our gang, or something like okay. And I prefer to use the term physical punishment. And I think it's also important to think about all the different ways that sometimes adults will try to teach children using some form of pain or discomfort to the body. So that could mean hitting. It could mean hot saucing the tongue. It could mean, the old you're going to be sent to your room without supper thing. That's a form of physical punishment. It's extremely uncomfortable to be very hungry and not getting fed. So I think, I just want to lay a blanket rule that nothing that involves harming or causing pain or discomfort to a child's body is ever an acceptable or ethical way to teach them whatever you want to teach them. So I guess I'll just start with that.
Can I ask a question right away?
Yeah.
So to me, social shaming or being abandoned in some small way is pretty awful, especially for a child. And I kind of think as timeout, I think of timeout as being a miniature version of that. I know that there are folks who say that it can be used correctly and all. I just don't see how a child's mind can understand timeout.
I think, Dale, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that child psychologists are really moving away from this idea of timeouts as being effective or compassionate ways of educating children about behavior. In fact, there is a very strong movement that gets away from punishment, period, and moving way more into the realm of using language, incorporating the child into family culture and rituals that allows them to feel included as opposed to excluded, and that need to just be part of something is extremely important to children. And I mean, Dale, I want to kind of toss it over to you because I know you have some great thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, you're right. It's It sounds crazy to people when they hear the idea that we're moving away from punishment. But it's true. The idea of the timeout is losing favor among researchers. What they're moving toward is more of an idea of building strong attachment between the child and the parents, rather than situational punishment. When something goes wrong and you punish. Instead, you are encouraging a certain approach to the relationship such that the child is less likely to misbehave in the first place. And when they do misbehave, you approach it in terms of reason. You approach it in a way that explains the reason that it is the behavior was inappropriate. And if a child is properly attached, attachment parenting is what I'm referring to the parent, they're more likely to want to please the parent and therefore not require active punishment.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's also moving towards just a more positive approach towards communication. So, for example, a child is holding a cup that's very full. There's a big difference between saying to a small child, don't spill that, and let's hold it firmly because we don't want the water to come out. So it's giving them something positive to think about doing to improve the situation, as opposed to warning them, this is a bad thing, don't do this. It's way more helpful to a child who really does want to figure out the best way to do things, to instruct them in that way. Well, I have done a lot of research into how the pro-spanking movement is very much supported by conservative, religious, oftentimes authority figures who pose as parenting experts. So what you see in the foreground there is just a little sampling of some of the many books that I've ordered, all of them used for $1 each, and I can kind of give additional income to the authors, where these folks are telling usually a Christian audience, just because this is the United States, you're going to find similar justifications with other religious messaging in other countries, but mostly you're going to find it supported by Christian ideology in the United States. And it's very much supported by this idea of sinfulness in children. Once you get parents hooked into the idea that children, even newborn babies, are sinful, it gives them all kinds of ammunition to then tell parents that this is not only an acceptable way to discipline and teach children, it's in some communities required. So in my book, Breaking Their Will, I looked at how this manifests itself in all kinds of religious communities in the U.S. And the sinfulness mantra is critical to that in conservative Christian circles. What I thought I'd do is just read you a few quotes that I've gathered from some of these books, and I know Dale's going to add to this. So one of the books I have here is written by a guy named J. Richard Fugate in What the Bible Says About Child Training. And you'll hear the word training come up very often in some of these books. And mind you, some of the ones I'm going to be talking about, were published in the 70s, 80s, sometimes 90s. I think that Christian communities are getting away from this idea of child sinfulness and beating children because the Bible says you should and things like that. It's not quite as crude today, is my understanding, but yet it is still justified in ways that are sort of disguised as being loving. So they get to it either way. What Richard Fugit says is a child need not be taught how to lie, to be selfish, or to do wrong. These things come naturally. Every sweet, innocent, cuddly baby possesses within his flesh the constant temptation to fulfill the strong desire of sin. Then you have a guy named John Rosemond, who is very popular and wrote a series of Christian parenting books and columns. In his book, Parenting by the Book, Biblical Wisdom for Raising Your Child, he writes, Grandma knew that every child came into the world bearing a nature that was already corrupt, depraved, that each and every child was a natural-born criminal, and that to steer the little criminal in a pro-social direction required a combination of powerful love and powerful discipline. Rosemond goes on to refer to a crying and demanding child as, quote, the spawn of Satan.
Yikes.
Most people, I think, are familiar with Focus on the Family, which was started by a psychologist named James Dobson, hugely popular. He has just a huge enterprise of products and podcasts and all kinds of things. And I don't know what he's doing these days, but I know that he has made a ton of money from
laughing to the bank
his teachings. Yeah. In his first edition of Dare to Discipline, this is a few decades old, but he wrote he wrote that the pain that is used, and a lot of these writers will focus on the need for physical punishment to be painful. If there is no pain, they will blame parents for just being the weakest, poorest parents. And so he talks about the use of pain to punish a rebellious child is a, quote, marvelous purifier. So again, getting back to this idea of we want to use physical punishment to purify a child, to rid the child of sin, because you're being a good parent and a righteous parent by opening up that pathway towards being saved or making it to heaven after they die. I mean, this is a very serious thing in certain Christian communities. I'll just get out a few more here. Another Dobson quote, which is from his book, The New Strong-Willed Child. He maintains that children are, quote, naturally inclined toward rebellion, selfishness, dishonesty, aggression, exploitation, and greed. They don't have to be taught these behaviors. They are natural expressions of their humanness. And then finally, we've got a guy named Jack Hyles. This guy was a real winner. He would find this quote in the Bible, I believe it's in Proverbs, that talks about that sinful people need to be whipped and that it needs to leave marks on the body. And so he wrote, blows that hurt cleanse away evil, as do stripes the inner depths of the heart. The parent who disciplines cleanses the child from evil character and inward sin. Sometimes spanking should leave stripes on the child. So you can see how, this, and these are people that usually have run a church, who are considered to be religious authorities. So they carry some of the God weight. I'll just point out this lovely tome, small tome, To Train Up a Child. This is hugely popular, especially in homeschooling communities, written by Michael and Debbie Pearl. And he's a pastor, got into a whole lot of trouble when he was promoting. I mean, he, like a lot of these people, will go into detail, literally, how do you whip a child or beat a child or hit a child. And 3 children that I'm aware of have died at the hands of parents who were following his teachings, where they found his books in their home after they were carted off to jail. I also want to point out that there is a series of books called Baby Wise. And you won't think that they have any kind of religious infusion in them, but you know, they're nicely put together. They are hugely popular. Baby Wise series, it was started by a guy named Gary Ezzo, Ezzo. Well, when I looked into him a little bit, I found out that he has a whole nother line of Christian books. So he understood that to market this in a broader way, he needed to have these appear as secular books. But the roots of this come from his version of Christianity. And finally, we're probably not ready for our special guest yet.
I wanted to get the caller.
Okay,
too, that's
real
waiting.
good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go to these two books when we have a special guest today, and I'll introduce her a little bit later in a few minutes. But I'll wait on these then for when we have Beth and Anita joining us.
Right on. Okay, so y'all ready for our caller? Okay, this is Joseph from North Carolina. He has a 4-year-old daughter with autism and wants advice on how to approach other parents about her and not alienate her. So, Joseph, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine. You're on with Jan, Claire, and Dale.
Yeah, I live in a relatively conservative community. I mean, I'm sure it gets worse out there. But, you know, with the autism side of my daughter brings its own challenges, and that's not necessarily what I was hoping to discuss, but mainly that I realized that making friends is not going to be her strongest point. It's not going to be the easiest thing for her. And I imagine sometime in the future, and I apologize, I have a cold, so if I sound a little scratchy, but I imagine sometime in the future when she finally does make a friend, there's a high probability that the parents of that person will be conservative and religious, and I don't know, you know, to what degree they will be, but I'm trying to think of a good way to talk to them in a way that doesn't alienate them, and but at the same time sets up some clear boundaries so that they don't feel like, or I get, you know, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I've never been on a call.
You're doing fine, and
yeah.
and we understand exactly what your concern is. Yeah, if it's okay to jump in now, Josh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that given the fact that your little girl is autistic, that right there is a challenge for her that, you know, chances are other children that she'll be interacting with, you know, that's going to be new, that they don't have, and that would be a new thing for their parents. Is she in any kind of special school just for autistic kids, or is she in a more regular school?
We've got her in a pre-K program right now with the public schools. Unfortunately, bye, Alyssa. That's her, actually, if you can hear. So we've got her in a pre-K program that was set up through the public schools. But unfortunately, I make just enough money to not qualify for a lot of aid that I would be able to get, or that other people would get, but just little enough money to where I struggle to provide a lot of that on my own.
Yeah. Right. So these other children and their families would likely not be familiar with autism and the challenges that it comes with. So I think I'll give you an analogy, because here in Texas and in many other parts of the country, there's a really big concern about gun safety. And when my daughter was going to be going to somebody's home that I wasn't familiar with, and I didn't know the people very well, I always wanted to have a little education there about gun safety. And it seemed tricky at first, but then it became pretty natural, where I would just say, you know, this is our household policy is, like, if the child was coming over to our house, you know, we sometimes, you know, we just tell folks that, you know, we're a no-gun zone. And if my daughter was going to someone else's home, I would just want to cover a few questions for them about the way that they took care of their weapons if they had any. And so I just kind of would send over a little literature. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but just to say, you know, we always check with other households before our daughter goes off. So just to make sure that if there are any weapons in the house, that they are locked up properly. In a similar way, and I don't know your view on guns, so don't get that mixed up with what we're talking about. I just wanted to kind of get across. Yeah, that I think the first thing that you might want to do is just sit down with the parents or communicate with them in some way separate from where the kids would be involved, and just talk about the issue of autism. Have them understand what it is and how it will manifest itself and sometimes be wrongly perceived as disobedience or sullenness or that kind of a thing. Does that sound like something you might be comfortable looking into doing?
Yeah, and I don't mind, talking to people about all it. And I still have a lot to learn. We just found this out this year, and the first thing I found out as I tried to look into it more was that I thought I knew what autism was, but I really had no idea. And so I'm in the process of trying to learn as much as I can about it and provide her the best future possible. The real issue being is that there's this communication barrier. You know, I've noticed in the other shows how you'll talk about, taking your kid to church and then having a conversation with them afterwards about it. And so that you can kind of help bring them to a place of understanding so that they can think about it for themselves, which is, it's ironic. I had all of these ideas about how I wanted to parent that are very different now because of this, because communication isn't something that I can rely on, at least not right now. I do hope that eventually we can get to a place where the communication will be better. But my concern is that she seems to take in a lot more than she gives out. And, if she goes to a house where the parents are particularly religious, or really anything, it could be, a bully at school that would be filling her head with stuff that's not necessarily true. And I'm concerned that she wouldn't either be able to or wouldn't want to express that to me after it happens. I want to be able to have the conversation with parents that also lets them know that, it's really important to me that the topics, whether they're religious or political, or I don't even know what all the topics I would mention would be, but that those are things that I would rather discuss with her at this point until, I don't know. Does that make any sense?
It makes complete sense to me, Joseph. My sister, her son is autistic, and I can tell you that your advocating for your child starts now and will never stop. And you probably will find out years from now instances when she thought that she was part of a joke and was actually the butt of the joke and didn't realize it until she was much older. These are things that have happened to my sister's son. You will have to educate people as best you can and be there to defend and help them learn the things that the rest of us learn more easily. There's every child is different. You'll discover what your child needs, but it will surprise you no matter what it is. That's been my experience with my nephew from the very start, when he would growl at me when I would look at him. And I thought, wow, that's, what do I do with that? And at that point, we didn't know that he was autistic. And now, once we figured it out, it was like, okay, all right. Autistic children run the gamut, and you're going to have to be an Uber dad. That's just what it's going to take. Yeah. Dale, any thoughts?
Well, what I'm sitting here wondering is 10 or 11 years ago, there were no very few non-religious parent support groups anywhere. And those came into being over the course of the last decade. I am wondering if there are support groups for non-religious parents of autistic children. It seems to me that or any non-normative, I mean, it could be a broader umbrella than that. There are, as you're pointing out, there are specific issues that come up with that population of parents that I think could really benefit from a support community. So you might want to check to see if they're poke around online, see if there is such a thing now. If not, I really think it'd be worth forming a Facebook group, just that simple. And you put a bunch of parents in that situation into the same group, and you're going to start being able to exchange really useful information. You're going to have parents at different levels, some of whom have kids who are much older and would be able to answer exactly these questions in a way that I would just be grasping at straws. And one of the smartest things I eventually figured out since my books came out is to not talk when I don't know what I'm talking about, to really stay away from topics that I have no expertise in at all. And this is one of them. But you want to get with people who do, and that's other parents. So if you do that, or if you want some help doing that, you want some help promoting it, please get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. Dale at dalemcgowan.com is one way to get in touch with me. But I will promote that to the groups that I'm connected with. And we could, that would really be a resource worth having, I think.
Yeah, I definitely have looked out to try to find groups that, I'm actually a board member on one of the local non-religious groups. It's actually more of a critical thinking group than it is necessarily non-religious. I also am a member of a local autism group, but it seems to be that the non-religious crowd, really not many of them even have children, much less a child on the spectrum. Right. And the autistic crowd, they're a mixed group. I won't necessarily say that they're necessarily all religious or anything like that, but I haven't really brought that topic up with them because I don't want to alienate myself from a group that I think is important.
Yeah, that's an interesting issue. That's why you want to cast the widest possible net. If you can get online, get into social media, they are there. They are out there, and you could, and they're probably doing the same thing, feeling very much alone. And if people can start to gather online, that could be a huge resource for people.
Okay.
Brilliant, Dale. Great idea. So I hope that helped, Joseph.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me. And sorry about my cold.
Don't even worry about it.
My voice and my brain aren't working at full capacity.
Oh, neither are mine, and I don't have your excuse. So, give us a call back if you want to in the future and let us know how things are going, and maybe you could give us some words that we could pass on to other folks when we get asked these sorts of questions. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I did really want to thank you guys for having this show. There's a lot of people out there that are living in very various communities where they're surrounded by people that just don't see things the way that they do, and having a program like this has been really helpful for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. We don't want people to feel isolated.
Yep. Part of the community, no matter where you are.
Thank you for your call.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Joseph. We have Bethany on the line. Shall we talk to Bethany?
Sounds great.
Yes, all righty. And I'll let Jan do the introductions and all that.
Okay, so when I was researching my book, I came across something online called An Open Letter to Roy Lessin. So first I'm going to tell you who Roy Lessin was. And so I've been saving these two books, these two wonderful parenting books. One is called Spanking, Why, When, How, and the other one, a newer version, Spanking, A Loving Discipline. And the person who's on the line, Bethany Britton, is now an old friend of mine. I'm very happy to say hi, Bethany.
Hi, it's good to talk to you.
It's so great to hear your voice. And the reason why I wanted our audience to hear from Bethany is because she grew up in a church that Roy Lessin was a member of, and actually kind of an authority figure. And so her parents and other adults in that community were drawing directly from the source, if you will, about using physical punishment to control children. And so with that, Bethany, I don't know how much you've been able to hear of what we've said so far, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and fill us in terms of the world you came from as a child.
Thank you. So yes, Roy Lessin was a deacon in our church and was pretty much the authority on how to raise godly children. And my parents met Shar and Roy about the time that I was pretty small. I was still an infant. My mother would tell a story about how great this theology was. And she would tell a story about the time that I had my first sin experience. She wanted to lay me down for a nap, and I turned bright red and started screaming. And she made sure that there wasn't a diaper pin or anything that was a problem, and then picked me back up and gave me my very first spanking at 6 months old. And she was amazed at how sinful a child could be, because when she laid me back down, I cried again. And so she picked me back up and spanked me again. And eventually I stopped crying. And so she would tell this story again and again as a way of showing how important it was for parents to recognize sin, even in a 6-month-old. And so in my church, the youngest that was ever hit that I know about was 5 months old. So that was the basis of their theology, is that children are born sinful and that they must be corrected immediately.
And before you joined us, I wanted you to know, I've got this stack of all these Christian parenting books, and I was reading quotes about sinfulness from them. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. I would love to burn them, but it's important to talk about.
I just want you to know I bought them all used. The authors got no money from what I purchased.
Fantastic. So this theology was incorporated into my household, and there were things that were really important to my parents, such as absolute obedience. So if we were asked to do something, we had to do it immediately, or it was determined that we were not obeying. Slow obedience is not obedience. And my parents would tell you that they were really clear on what the rules were in our household, and that they were very open about what we needed to do. But being a child raised in it, I can tell you that it was very confusing. It was often really difficult. I was born with the normal attention span of any little kid, so I would often forget or not be paying attention. And so the spankings came out of nowhere and were often really confusing and hard to deal with, and definitely left scars on me as I've grown up. I'm 50 now, and I'm still healing from those experiences.
I'm so sorry.
So would there be another direction you would like me to explain about the theology?
Claire or Dale, do you have any questions for Bethany at this point?
I do. I wonder what your relationship with your parents is like now.
Well, a year ago, I would have told you that we reached a point where it's very neutral. I'm not a big part of their lives anymore. But as of the last couple of months, I've actively cut ties. I'm at a point where they're not willing, even in conversations where they seem to be somewhat sad about what they've done, they come back to the Christian narrative as being more important than us. And I'm at a point now where I'd like my life to be a lot more happier, And so I think to reach that, I'm going to need to let them go. And I don't really know what that means, but I have stopped communicating, stopped checking in. I'm probably not going to be celebrating my mom's birthday. I'm really, really pulling away.
I support your decision in that. I had to make the same decision with
it's hard.
My mother. It's hard, but in the same breath, I can certainly tell you it's easier. You don't have to. I wouldn't put up with that sort of behavior from anyone else in my life. I would like to have a parent, but I don't need a parent. And if I have a choice, I don't need that in my life. I don't need abuse. Yeah, nobody needs abuse. And there are other people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that I've let them go. It's given me space to really feel all of the feelings. And one of the things that happens with this kind of parenting is the children, I never learned how to sit with uncomfortable emotions. I never learned to self-soothe. And so I get overwhelmed at times with emotions, and I do have PTSD. But having them step back, it's allowed me to kind of feel those pre-verbal horrors that I think I was not able to sit with. And one of the things I would love for parents to understand is that just because an infant is small doesn't mean they're going to forget what happened. No. It has a huge impact. We always think about toddlers being hit or small children, but infants, I can't tell you how sick I am that theology is out there and adopted by parents.
Yeah, the science behind it is there. It's called a somatic memory. And I can tell you that in my house, we have firsthand experience with that because my son, when he was an infant, required some extraordinarily painful shots. He was only a few months old, and he only had 2 of them. But the older he got, the more phobic he was of shots. And I'm not talking about the way most kids are, like, ooh, scared, like trying to get out the door, hiding under the physician's thing. True terror. And yeah, and when he, we had to do what's called EMDR. It's a method of desensitizing.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
Right, yeah, me too. Anybody who's having a really messed up past has to do MDR pretty much, and to digest these things more quickly. And through that, he's now able to get a shot without crawling out of his skin. It's still a little scary for him. And when you get back into that memory, it's there. To him, as an infant, he thought he was dying. It was so painful.
Yeah.
And of course you're going to be terrified of something that you think is killing you. And it goes straight to that limbic part of your brain, and there's no logic that's going to get in there. Forget it. So, yeah, I get the whole somatic memory. It doesn't matter how small you are. You remember things. You remember associations. And you don't have to have the words for it if it's that extreme. And I am so sorry that your parents put you through that. They're supposed to be the people who love you and keep you safe. And to have them be the exact opposite, I have some experience with that. And I know how hard it is to get past it and get through it.
Yeah, it brings to mind, as I hear you talk, one of the first steps in healing I took was reading Alice Miller's book, The Body Never Lies, and she hits right what you're saying in a very profound way. So I highly recommend that book to anyone who's trying to put pieces back together again.
That's interesting you brought that up. I brought with me, just to kind of balance things out here, some great books about parenting, folks that talk specifically about the dangers of physical punishment and the importance of how to relate to your child in ways that don't involve causing pain, harm, discomfort, and so forth. So, and 3 of the books that I have happen to be by Alice Miller.
Yay!
And this
is great.
Yeah. She grew up with terrible abuse, terrible emotional neglect as well. Her mother was just really a horrible parent. And so what I have here is And if anyone has any comments about any of these books, I'll just read them out because I think all of her work has been so enlightening to people, especially survivors of abuse. So this one is Banished Knowledge, The Body Never Lies, the one that Bethany just talked about, The Truth Will Set You Free, and For Your Own Good. And there are lots of her writings are online, and I'll just kind of quickly go through some of these other books. Murray Strauss wrote a lot about and talked a lot about the harms of corporal punishment, and he wrote this book, Beating the Devil Out of Them, which I talk about in my book, actually, this idea that you're literally getting some sort of demonic force out of a child. As crazy as that sounds, it's really, when you're raised in a culture like that, you don't really question it or, whether it's rational or not. Then I also have a few that are written by people of faith. And I just want to make it clear that there is, there are many communities, Christian and otherwise, that don't support these authoritarian ideas. And one book that's written by a teacher and now director of a seminary here in Austin. His name is David Jensen, and he wrote a faith-based book about caring for children in a compassionate way called Graced Vulnerability. So I bring this up because some people have called in the past and said, well, I'm part of this religious culture. I really want to talk to them about the harms of physical punishment. How do I do that? And there are some great books about it that are written by Christian authorities. This is a book called The Child's Song, written by Don Apps. He was a theology professor at Princeton. And then finally, I have the Discipline book by William Sears. Dr. Sears and his wife have put out a lot of great writing about compassionate parenting. So, Dale, do you have anything that you might want to ask Bethany while she's with us?
Well, I want to second what Jan said and absolutely reinforce your idea to pull away. I talk to parents a lot about ways to have these conversations, ways to try to repair the relationship, how to approach it in a way that won't make the parents, your parents, defensive. So there are lots of things to try. And there is a point at which you have to be done. You have to say, I made the best effort I could make and pull away. And it really does sound like you reached that point very intelligently and did what you had to do. I would also second what Jan was saying, this awareness of resources for Christian parents is actually really important, because one of the things we can do as people who have a research-based understanding of corporal punishment, they are not necessarily going to approach it in the same way that we did. They're not necessarily going to respond to the same resources that I have. So to have some books by Christian parenting authors like William Sears that you mentioned, the Discipline book is really a very good book. That's a good resource to be able to point them to. Now, I want to make sure we're talking about William Sears, not Bob Sears, who is his son and who has some problematic views about vaccines. That's a different Dr. Sears. Very confusing. William Sears is the one. There's another Christian parenting book that I recommend when I'm talking to Christian parents called Parenting with Love and Laughter. And it very simple. There's a huge amount of overlap between the non-religious parenting, the secular parenting model, and the model advocated by progressive Christian authors like that. I can't remember the name of the author, but the book is Parenting with Love and Laughter. And those are the sorts of things that can begin to open that conversation in that community so that we can start to, the people who are predisposed to peeling away from that nonsense, that, and who can help us break the cycle, because that's one of the things that we have to do here. That's one of the things that you have done and that we're doing. if we can have one generation that isn't subject to corporal punishment, they are then less likely to inflict it on their own children. So it really just takes our generation stopping that practice with ours. So thank you for being part of this conversation and for helping to make that decision with your own life.
Thank you. And I really appreciate this conversation because it's going in two directions. One is for the parents that are parenting now, and then those of us who are healing from bad parenting. So that's a really important conversation, and I'm really happy that you were willing to include both of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great point. Bethany, anything that you can tell us about your life now and where your focus might be? What have you... other types of self-care have you're practicing for yourself?
Sure. I'm an instructional designer, which means I build training for corporations, and I got into that field because of the learning in psychology and wanting to figure out how to motivate people outside of fear. And so that's kind of been my focus in my professional world. I will say that 4 years ago, I came down with an autoimmune disease. I have a disease called pemphigoid. My body is literally rejecting my skin. So I've been in cancer treatment, and I'm very sure that my past trauma has led or exacerbated this. And so I have been learning to be patient. One of the byproducts of authoritarian parenting is you learn to distrust, if not dislike, your body. And so pemphigoid has been a wake-up call for me to really respect my body and learn how it works and learn how to take care of its needs. One of the biggest things about authoritarian parenting is the parent's needs usually outweigh the child's. So I grew up, disregarding what I needed. And so pemphigoid has been I wouldn't say fabulous teacher, definitely a hard one. But I'm taking the lessons in, and I'm changing my life, and I'm happier. I know that sounds weird, but I'm a lot happier, and I have a lot of community, and so I feel very, very supported.
Makes perfect sense to me. And just to affirm again what you're talking about, I have experienced the same thing. I only in my late 40s, early 50s, connected to my physical person.
Yep.
I didn't understand a lot of things about touch and what it meant until fairly recently.
Yep.
Yeah. When people would say, if you feel bad, do you want a hug? I'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then through really great counseling, the woman who is now my mother of choice, I guess you could say, Mama Victoria, I love you. She taught me how to accept touch. And the way when I knew it happened was, this is a personal story, but bear with me. I was on the couch. I had frozen shoulder. The dog jumped on my shoulder and torqued it, which is tearing all sorts of tissue, and I just shrieked in agony. It was really painful. And all of a sudden, my husband and my 2 children were just physically on me, holding me, and I felt better. It was the first time in my life that touch actually felt like something to me. So I get what you mean about being disconnected and learning how to accept what your body is telling you. It's you don't know that you don't have it until you do have it.
And I think you're bringing up a really good point about the harm of physical neglect.
Yep.
I was physically abused as a kid, not anything near what Bethany suffered, but I was beaten with a belt by a very strong person who happened to be my father. But there was also persistent, everyday, ongoing physical neglect in that no one, very rarely, would anyone give me a hug, So there was that coldness, and it's it's harder to really kind of identify because it's something that's not there that you don't know you're supposed to have as a nutrient in a way of life. So
I remember sitting in church and just wanting to lean on my father, and he'd tell me, "Sit up straight." I mean, okay, I get it. We get it. So things are moving forward and getting better in our own parenting. Although I do have, like I said, a story to tell myself if we have time.
And I think I would like to hear it, but I do want to say that, I feel like I'm in my 50s now, and I think that this is a time of life when a lot of people are realizing how their past affects their lives, their choices, their happiness, and really start to explore ways to seek out healthier and healthier lives. And I'm really glad that I'm at that point, and that other people I know are at that point in their I want to say usually it seems late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, but I would love for that to happen sooner for people.
Right. Yes.
And it really does take a while before you let go of some of the things you just felt like you had to hold on to with an iron fist because
reasons
because that's what you associated with who you were, who you were as a child.
Totally.
And then you hopefully get to a point earlier where you can, as Bethany has done, let that go and have confidence in your own abilities, your own worth, your values, and how important those are, and how good they make you feel.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Earlier is better.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Anything else?
Well, if I meet any of you in person, I will totally offer you a hug.
Awesome.
Oh.
Awesome. I love hugs now.
Great. And Bethany, you and I are going to catch up more soon. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just really appreciate your guys' work. I think it's really important. So thank you for doing it and supporting so many of us.
And thank you for telling us what you've told us. It was extremely important.
Thank you for joining us so much.
Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I need to breathe for a second. I'm on the verge of tears here.
Well, you had some. You had a lot of important stuff come up.
Yeah.
For you. And
right. Yeah.
So take your time. Take your time with it. And
so yeah.
Dale, anything you want to say?
No, just that was phenomenal. That was really. I'm really glad she called in.
Yeah.
That's really a great perspective, and I just think hearing the way people have processed and worked through issues like that and help themselves move forward. I just think we can't hear enough of that kind of individual stories because they're all a little different. So I'm glad she called.
And I think what we see happening with this show is that there are people who are exploring those things and taking really courageous steps and moving forward in a healthy way with their lives. And when those people are parents, it really carries through to the next generation and has a wonderful ongoing type of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that just, when you have parents that have gone through that process of seeking a healthier life,
right.
Then, we can feel more assured that their children are going to have a better upbringing than what they had.
Right. We hope. Sometimes I know it's true that I was beaten, so you're going to be beaten sort of stuff.
But that's not someone who's actually processed.
Right,
though.
right.
That's,
totally animal.
That's the worst of the worst.
Which reminds me of an article that when we were researching or talking amongst ourselves about doing this topic for a show, I think you shared an article about the argument of, I turned out okay. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that just goes back to the need that many people have to only see their upbringing as something positive. And so they will find ways to justify it in whatever way they can. And one of those ways is to say, I was spanked as a kid and I turned out fine. It is way too painful for those people to look at how they didn't turn out fine. Mm-hmm. And it's just part of what they feel they need to do for themselves is to think that, you know, they are in a good place and that what their parents or whoever the adults were in charge were doing were good, because it's just excruciatingly difficult. There's all sorts of cognitive dissonance that goes on to actually observe, you know, as some might say, observe without judgment. One of the highest forms of intelligence, my yoga teacher would say. Mm-hmm. It is essential to get to that point, to be able to look at what happened to you as a child, as an observer, and just as for a certain period of time, try not to attach whatever triggery feelings come up from that, and just sit with it for a while. Mm-hmm. No one's gonna, you know, you're not gonna be struck by lightning. Your parents are gonna not disown you. Mm-hmm. You know, nothing really bad's gonna happen mm-hmm. if you just take a minute to look at that, to look at who you were as a child. I think that's something that's brought me a lot of peace, actually. I didn't want to think about who Jan the little girl was for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know much about that child because I was raised in this household where no feelings were discussed. Mm-hmm. And so I just didn't even quite know anything about myself mm-hmm. until I became a young adult and when mm-hmm. I was in college. Mm-hmm. So there was all that period of time where it was this kind of blank slate walking around. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think I put that off for a long time. But once I did start to look into just who was that child and how, mm-hmm. what was that like when, you know, just sitting alone in the kitchen, you know, mm-hmm. where no one is engaging in conversation. I mean, I don't want it to sound like I had a severely abusive childhood, but it was severely neglectful, I think, mm-hmm. In emotionally at least. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's harm that comes with that. But that doesn't mean that I'm like racked with, you know, anger and I want to, mm-hmm. you know, go out and hurt somebody. It's not like that. I also am not a huge believer in forgiveness. I'm not like on the forgiveness mm-hmm. train. Yeah. I think that's that can be a harmful thing.
It's toxic positivity.
I think it's used to justify bad things. So it's not about that either for me, but I do think that the whole I turned out fine thing is just someone putting up a wall mm-hmm. because they're just not ready to go back and look at what they experienced as a child.
I think their definition of fine probably has more to do with I am a functioning adult. Yeah, I'm functioning, but for the first 30 years of my life, I was miserable.
I'm not on drugs and I haven't killed anyone.
That's hardly a measure of success.
Or not lately.
Right. Because then I look at how I was and moved in the world as a child, and then look at the children I know who have been raised in happy, loving homes, which I consider mine to be, and other people I know. And they're different people from who I was. That is fine. That's what fine looks like, when they are comfortable in their own skin and they talk because they know they'll be heard and they have opinions and they can emote and they hold nothing back. It's a different thing. That's what fine looks like.
Right.
And it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong.
And I think that Bethany and many others can, and I think we should have a show just on the topic, I think, of how to navigate relationships with people that, or not navigate them, people that were a huge part of your upbringing and now you have to make decisions about how much they're going to be in your life. There's so many things. My nonprofit has a Facebook group called Child Friendly Faith, and there are 700 plus people in it, and so many people share stories like that. So I think that's a really important topic to delve into.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. Dale, you've been quiet for a long time. Anything
Well, I'm just in total agreement. And I wanted to add to the discussion of the I turned out fine thing. In addition to the question of whether someone turned out fine, which I think is really a good one, whether we are as whole as we could be. There's also that really one of the best examples in that article that you shared is the seatbelt example. And I think it's a way to let people understand how silly I turned out fine is. If you went down the freeway at 90 miles an hour without a seatbelt and weren't killed, and then at the end of it, you advocate not wearing a seatbelt because you weren't killed, that's exactly the kind of logic that is going on when somebody talks about corporal punishment in this way. We know, we have the research, we have the outcomes. I don't even remember if earlier we talked about the details of the Gershoff study, but I think we ought to. Did we get to
We did on other shows, but not
on other shows. But if I could just,
that's you go.
Yeah, quickly insert that because I think it's another powerful aspect of this. Elizabeth Gershoff, who is now at UT Austin and was at Columbia before that, is the go-to for this. She did a powerful meta-study and an analysis of 88 corporal punishment studies in, I think it was 2006, and she updated it in 2016. And it looked at 17 variables, 17 results of corporal punishment, looking at 160,000 children over the course of 50 years of studies. And they isolated 17 variables, and every single variable is negative. In the earlier study, they actually came up with one positive variable, which is immediate compliance, right? So your kids will be more likely to be depressed, more likely to be aggressive, more likely to beat their own children, but they'll do what you ask in the moment. That was the 2006 study. In 2016, that variable didn't even hold up. They discovered that children who are subject to corporal punishment are actually less likely over time to be obedient. They actually become numb to the effect of the corporal punishment and are less likely to be responsive to it. So a child who is reasoned with, who is taught to be self-disciplined, not just disciplined, but self-disciplined, those are the kids who end up having the best outcomes across the board. So the research is there. You can get rid of the fallacy there. It really, we have an awful lot of arrows in the quiver. I shouldn't use that enough. Oh.
Careful.
We've got a lot of pieces on the chessboard. I don't know how to put it. Everything is in place for someone to be reached. You can reach them through the secular parenting books, through the Christian parenting books, and it's really something that there are conversations that we need to have. It's really worthwhile.
And I think that goes back to what I was mentioning about introducing positive concepts as opposed to the negative. So, physical punishment is about focusing on the negative behavior and then trying to make it go away. When we look more at providing tools for children so that we can enhance their well-being. That's the other thing. If you're in a conversation with someone and they want to use the "I turned out fine" thing, and they don't want to, consider all these studies, what you can tell them is that even if you take all those studies away, there is not one study that shows that physical punishment enhances the well-being of children. Mm-hmm. And that's where, I think we want to go with our parenting models. It's not about crushing mm-hmm. the negative and perceiving children in a negative light, mm-hmm. as, for example, as sinful, as what Bethany talked about and what I brought out earlier. It's really about learning about child development and how amazing, the brain. I mean, the brain is developing faster than, at any other point in its life during those early years. There's so much fascinating things we can learn about it, and that can just lead to all kinds of good things in parenting.
And it's clear to me right now that we need to have a show on what to do, the right way to discipline, but that's for another show. We have a caller. Shall we go to the caller gang?
Sure.
This is Marissa, and she has questions about adopting religious kids and how to support them while still staying true to your own non-belief in the supernatural. All righty. So,
good one.
Marissa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. You're on with Claire, Janet, and Dale. You had a question for us.
Yes. My husband and I are planning on fostering and possibly adopting, and the possibility is there that they will be older kids, older than 10, 12, into their teens. And we are both secular. We understand that these kids could come from a variety of homes, and I want to be able to support these kids in a belief in God or wanting to participate in religious ceremonies. But I want to be able to do that so that I make sure that our beliefs aren't infringed upon, and we're not doing anything that's uncomfortable to us without forcing I hate to use the word indoctrination, but forcing our beliefs upon these kids, but also giving them the opportunity to question them, if that makes any sense.
This sounds like Dale's area of expertise. Dale's got 2 thumbs up. You go, dude.
Yeah, I love this topic because, one of the reasons I love it is that my wife was identified as a Christian when we were married. For the first 13 years of our marriage, she identified as a Christian. She's now non-religious. But during that period of time, we had to figure out this exact question: how do you raise kids to have autonomy around these questions without completely renouncing your own values or disappearing in terms of expressing your own point of view? And fortunately, the way you do it is the same, even if you have religious, kids who have been religious in another family coming in. The idea is to preserve the autonomy of the child, to follow their own path, and at the same time express your own point of view. So what you end up saying is, first of all, you make it an open topic of discussion because it's interesting. Religion it's all around us, and it's fascinating to talk about. And one of the things you do is openly express your point of view, and you say, this is what I believe, and it's important to me, and I think it's true, but you have to make up your own mind. You can talk to other people, and I want you to talk to people who have a lot of different points of view and have a lot of different experiences and ask a lot of questions. And in the end, you decide on your own, and know that I will love and support you no less, regardless of what you decide is true. And you can change your mind 1,000 times if you want. You don't even have to settle into one thing. Giving a child that freedom, that I would never ask more than that or less than that of a religious parent. That's the way a non-religious or a religious parent can approach it, making it absolutely autonomous. And at the same time, as you pointed out, making sure that you aren't put in a position where you're uncomfortable or being asked to do something yourself. Now, if they have a church observance or something that requires you to make a statement of faith, for example, or to engage in a practice or a ritual that you're uncomfortable with, that's something that you politely decline to do because that is a violation of your own autonomy. So that kind of discussion can be, if it's presented as the norm, right from the beginning, it's something that kids can understand, that you are honoring and respecting their own autonomy and at the same time asking the same for yours. It can be a really interesting and exciting way to have a family atmosphere around religious questions.
Okay, great.
And Marissa, if I may add one thing to that, if there's a child that you're going to be fostering and you know that they come from a religious household, I wouldn't necessarily assume that they need or want to have religious influences in their life. It could be that they don't even really have a strong feeling about it, or it could even be that they have a negative association with it. And so I just totally support what Dale is saying, is that allowing the autonomy to rest in the hands of the child to just do whatever you feel is good, to get a sense for how they feel about those religious customs, and get a sense for how important it is to them. It just may be that it's really not important to them, or that they are fine without it.
Yeah, no, and I knew that. I didn't know how to go about if the kid says, yes, this is important to me, I want to go to church, I want to, participate in this. How do I support that with not infringing on my beliefs? I wasn't going to assume anything.
Have their room filled with Bibles or anything.
I kind of have.
Right. No, not at all. Of course, especially because the kids are older, I felt that I could ask them what they wanted to do, what they believed, if they wanted to go to church or, mosque or synagogue or whatever.
I kind of compare it to if you had a visitor from a different country, say, and they were staying with you and they did not know the area at all, and you might just sit down with them to say, so what are the customs that you like? What kinds of things would be important for you to do? If they say, I would like to attend the same kind of services I did before, well, okay, so describe those to me, and then the two of you could look for appropriate place of worship that the child thinks would be good for them. What were you going to say, Claire?
I have zero experience with this, so take this as what it is. If I had a child coming to me who had been a foster child or had been in other homes, I would kind of want to know why they want to do what they want to do, because it may be that they're doing it because the previous people said it was the thing to do. And then you're in a fantastic position of saying, so, there's more than one way of doing this, and this is how I do it. What do you think? And because they're children, and really, unless they're 20 or 30, their ideas are pretty much foisted on them by the adults around them. So if you give them more choice than what they've been presented with before, they might be like, oh, thank you for that. That'd be awesome. I don't know.
Okay.
It's just a guess.
Right. I don't think there has to be like a wall between you as the foster parent and your philosophies and worldviews, and then that child's. As Dale was saying, it could be a really fascinating and maybe new experience for them to have those kind of discussions, talking about all different kinds of religions and non-religions.
Yep.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Great. It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Marissa. Will you call us back maybe at a future time and let us know how
it went?
Yeah.
Will do. Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good luck to you.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that was really cool. Let's see. We were going to do favorite things in the show. We just have about 10 more minutes. You want to do a favorite thing? Who wants to do a favorite thing? Favorite thing is when we, the hosts, tell you all about things that we felt were super wonderful at some point in raising children. A favorite author, a favorite book, a favorite toy, a favorite activity in the car on long trips and stuff, whatever. So do y'all want to go first? Dale, you look excited. Go.
Oh, I didn't mean to look excited.
You just jumped. You're like, woo, I want to do this. All right.
Well, the first one that occurred to me was actually a book. My kids, like a lot of kids, got into myths for a while. They were absolutely bananas for myths. And for a while, that was the go-to for bedtime stories. And one of the challenges that a lot of parents talk about is how do you get kids literate about Christian myth, about Christian stories? without presenting it in this sort of, hands-off kid glove way that it's usually presented. And there's a book that I recommend called, it's called In the Beginning, Creation Stories from Around the World. The author is Virginia Hamilton. It's this beautifully illustrated book. And instead of being a book of myths from one culture, it's a book of the same myth from a whole lot of different cultures, which is, how did the world begin? Mm-hmm. And so it tells the Greek and Roman myth of the world's origin. It tells the Hopi myth, the Zoroastrian myth, the Hawaiian traditional myth, and so on. And then the Judeo-Christian story is in there. Each one of them is like 2 or 3 pages long, beautifully illustrated. And what happens is we just did one a night, one of these little 3-page stories. And it's like, okay, now we're going to look at the, the trickster myths of I think this was the trickster was the Yanomamo, or I can't remember which one had the story that is included in the book, because there are lots of different tricksters in the mythologies. But that book was an amazing way to present the Christian story just in the context of other myths and legends. And it's not exalted, it's not denigrated, it's just in there. And the kids see that, oh, I see, this is just a bunch of people trying to figure out the world when they didn't have a better way of doing it. Mm-hmm. So you get the deep information about myths, little entertainments, and beautiful pictures, and Bob's your uncle.
Right on. Right on.
I can think of some favorite things about this time of year. First of all, Christmas lights. My daughter and I, we love them.
Yeah.
Not a big fan of the blow-up balloon characters, and then you're driving around the next day and they've let the air out, and so they're just like puddles of Santa and reindeer around people's lawns.
That's the name of my next band, right there. Puddles of Santa.
But no, we do love the lights. And my daughter, even though she's only grown up in Texas, just has this fascination with snow and anything snow-like, like icicles. And there was one year where a neighbor must have, or might have been a business, accidentally let off a sprinkler system, and it was a night that, one of the few nights, we had a freezing temperatures, and so it was just like this winter wonderland scene where all these just icicles, glimmering off of the branches of these bushes, and we just couldn't stop taking photos. And of course, she needed to snap one off, and she does this every year and put it in the freezer, so she can always go back to that icicle.
Right? There's something about that, being able to keep it. Last time we did this game, Dale, you recommended Neil Gaiman's movie Stardust.
Yeah.
We watched it as a family and loved it. So, yeah 2 thumbs up. Woo! And as far as the snow goes, one of our absolutely most magical Christmases was when we went to my in-laws in South Carolina, and it snowed a bunch on Christmas Day. And they were little.
South Carolina, wow.
Yeah, right? And it was magical, positively magical. So my favorite thing, whenever you get a child a toy, or the little guys, the infants, like a stuffed animal, a blanket, I don't care what it is. If it has a tag on it, that's what they play with. They don't care about the stuffed animal. They don't care about the rest of it. They just play with that little tag. And I'm sure it's a coordination and a manipulation thing. And so one of my favorite things, and that's why it's on the set, is this sort of toy. It's just covered with tags. And I was like, at last, someone who has figured it out for real. And it's brightly colored, and there are lots of tags, so the kiddo can sit there and doink, doink, doink on the tags, and it's awesome. So that was one of my favorite things when my kiddos were small. So, yeah. That was favorite things real fast. And I guess now we're down to the point where I have to tell a story on myself. And I don't have to, but I'm going to, as a cautionary tale to all parents. When my son was 2.5, he was a super energetic kid. I had to take him out twice a day and run him like a puppy, or else he just would not sleep at night. And even then he wouldn't sleep. He did not sleep. And one of his things that he would do at 2.5 was he would love to show how fast he could run. And one of his favorite things to do was to run into streets. And as many times as I told him that was a bad thing, that, a car would basically turn him into peanut butter and all of the things, he kept doing it. He kept doing it. He kept doing it. at that point, I had him and a babe in arms, his sister, and I had to carry her because she was that size. And he would run. He'd pull his hand out of my hand and run into streets, and I was just at wit's end. And I said, Cole, my son, if you do this one more time, I'm going to pop you on the butt, because I was just at wit's end. And we were in a parking lot. He loved to test, by the way, too. That was his other personality thing. We were in a parking lot. I had his hand. My husband was in front of me, so he didn't see what was going on. Parking lot, cars were coming out. Cole, sorry, kid, dashed away from me, ran to my husband, and I was holding the baby. I was just terrified that, this was just a mother's worst nightmare, to have your kid hit by a car. And so I caught up to him at the car, and I thought, I promised I was going to do this. And so I have to do it. That's how I felt about it, and so I just looked at him and I said, you did it when I told you not to do it. And I went on, pop, on his butt. And he looked at me, and I felt so awful. It was the worst thing. It was probably my worst parenting moment. Don't do it. It's never worth it. So yeah, I have used physical discipline on my son. And I'm serious. It felt ugly. I don't care if you want to say I'm over-exaggerating or whatever. It felt awful. And there's no justification for it. There's no reason for me to do it. I mean, there's always had to be a different way. But anyway, don't do it. Just don't. It's awful.
Yeah.
One of the things that people would say, don't hit your child in anger. Okay. How can you hit your child when you're not angry at them? And I'll tell you what, it's hard.
A lot of people do.
And I know, it's ugly and awful.
A lot of these books talk about that. They talk about, do it in a loving way. Well, you talk about a way to really screw up your kid.
Right. Say, I love you and smack.
I love you. Right. It doesn't make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't.
And there's never an acknowledgement that anything that just happened was wrong. There's never an apology.
Oh, I've apologized to him a million times since then. It doesn't matter. It's still awful. I still feel awful about it. I still wish I hadn't done it. Ugh. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, so let me get my book back. Excuse me. I shouldn't have dropped this on the floor. And let's finish our story for today. Anybody want us to say anything else? Are we good? Okay. So like I said, next week we've got Callie Wright, the 15th of this month. So that's going to be awesome. I would like to thank a few people. We have some Patreon folk. We have 2 folks giving at the butterfly level, and that would be Jonathan and Eric. And we have 2 people giving at what I consider the caterpillar level, and that's Janet and Maestro256, whoever that might be. I would also like to thank Philip Gunther for doing this marvelous introduction. It makes me happy every time it plays. And thank you to Mark and Vern and whoever else is on the other side of that wall doing the thing. There they are, all the good guys, right on. And thank you for tuning in. I hope that what we've done here today has helped you in some small way. Parenting is really super tough. But right now, I think you need to go and hug your kid. Bye.
Take care, everybody.